Hello, welcome back to Madrona's Pulse Teachings. I am Iris J, and I am chatting with you about the Scorpio full moon. We are in it. It is on May 12th. A Scorpio full moon is a time of shedding. It is a bit of a moment of shedding with all that Saturn is getting up to as well right now. I'm looking forward to chatting about it with you. I do have one announcement. I don't usually have announcements. I usually get right into the astro, but I have gotten a lot of emails, so I just want to put it out to all folks because I am also just super excited about my Evolutionary and Embodied Astrology program that is starting in September. And my announcement is that the early bird special ends June 1st. So there's a link below if you want to look at it. And I can't really describe how excited I am to just be putting all of me into this, working with the archetypes. It is going to be juicy now that I have finally landed. I can just keep getting all my ideas together in the ways we're going to talk and enter and work creatively. I'm going to bring some expressive arts into, and it is just going to be I'm really grateful for it. So to folks who have already signed up, I can't wait to see you. And if you're interested, the link is below. Now, Scorpio full moon. So this means that we have our moon in Scorpio and the sun in Taurus. So this is happening at 22 degrees. The sun's at 22 degrees of Taurus. Moon is at 22 degrees of Scorpio. And this is happening, as I said, on May 12th it's 12:55 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, so you want to adjust for wherever you are in the globe. And there's a lot of cosmic conversations going on with this full moon. Let's start with the base layer, which is a Scorpio full moon and that polarity of Taurus and Scorpio. So the sun is in Taurus, and that is earth energy. Scorpio is the opposite, and that axis of Taurus Scorpio brings us into our inner world, and it's the inner world of our depths. It is intimacy. It is intimacy. Scorpio is intimacy with ourselves, and it's intimacy with others. It's intimacy with life. It's intimacy with the goddess. It is intimacy with the process of the snake as it relates to goddess shedding skin. It is deep. And this is a deep full moon. Scorpio full moon is always deep because it's always that time of the witchy shedding and the alchemist that we're being asked to look at. So the moon is illuminating this 22-degree area of Scorpio. So we're being asked to look at wherever you have this in your chart, if you work with your natal chart, and just being asked to what is coming up for you right now. What is emerging for you right now? What is shedding? Now, there's different layers of shedding going on, but in Scorpio, when Scorpio is shedding and we're being asked to look at that, these are deep layers of ourselves that we're ready to let go of. We're ready. We've been carrying it with us. It's been transforming throughout our life, throughout different seasons, potentially throughout lifetimes. And now there is this kind of illumination that the full moon brings as we release. And yet that release is part of transformation. Scorpio is always transforming. That's why a lot of Scorpio energy can actually be a little exhausting because it's deep internal transformations. Now, the moon for this full moon is conjunct Juno. I've been mentioning Juno for quite a while, and now we have her center stage. She's conjunct the moon in Scorpio. She's in her retrograde. She is at 24 degrees retrograde in Scorpio. We also have other energy, and it's divine feminine energy in Scorpio. We also have Vesta conjunct Black Moon Lilith. They're in earlier degrees. They're at 6 and 9 degrees of Scorpio. So there's quite a lot of scorpionic energy here. And there's quite a lot of divine feminine scorpionic energy here. And so firstly, the moon is conjunct Juno, who has been helping us to feel into our depths, to come into relearning by unlearning the importance of being honest with ourselves, being so honest with what we need and what we want, and when we're in pain, and when we're in relationships that don't support us to be our most integral self, and especially the relationship with ourself and how that's supporting us or not supporting us to be our most integral self. And Juno here is absolutely about our relationship with the goddess. And so she is conjunct this moon. And there is something potentially extremely profound that is being illuminated that also relates to coming into the embodiment of our, I'm going to go ahead and say it, I just made a video where I was like, I don't say our most authentic self, but with this particular energy, because of what's happening, our most authentic self in this moment, because the sun is moving into its conjunction with Uranus in Taurus. So Uranus is at the final minutes of the 26th degree of Taurus. It's moving to the 27th degree. The sun will be in an exact conjunction with that about 5 days after this full moon. The moon, of course, will be in its exact opposition much earlier than that. And so Uranus is also part of this full moon. And so Uranus is moving to the 27th degree. It is conjunct this full moon. It's a wider conjunction than, say, that Juno, but it's there. And so this is now Uranian energy that comes in to this illumination of our inner depths, illumination of our connection with the goddess that is helping us to shed what keeps us from showing up as our most honest and juicy and raw self. Scorpio is raw energy. Scorpio doesn't put on the mask in terms of making itself pretty. It knows how to put on a mask in order to show up and survive. Scorpio is a survivor. But if it's putting on a mask, it's because it's in tension and potentially even fear-driven and needing to survive. Scorpio in its kind of most balanced state is raw, pulsing energy that is alchemizing. And now Uranus comes in and it's opposite that Juno and that full moon, and it's conjunct the sun. And this, it's bringing in, firstly, Uranus is always wild card energy. So Uranus, and when the wild card energy comes up, it can be sudden happenings, things we didn't see happening. It can also just be very fast moving energy. Uranus energy is fast. And it is, it's wanting to wake us up. And it's happening in Taurus. And it's happening, this is the last time that we're going to have the sun conjunct Uranus in Taurus, because the next year, when the sun is in its annual conjunction with Uranus, it's going to be in Gemini. So this is the last conjunction that we're coming into a few days after this full moon of the sun conjunct Uranus. And it's also significant because Uranus has been journeying with and is moving away from, now as it moves to the 27th degree, the fixed star Algol. Okay, so now Algol's energy is here too. Now, I don't want this to become too long a video. There's a lot out there on Algol. Algol is related to Medusa's head and myths that we inherit there. I have written on Medusa. I've worked with Medusa quite a bit, both in my own journey and in kind of my scholarship in feminist trauma theory. And most of what we receive in terms of Medusa comes from a very, very patriarchal myth. Okay, and her story of a victim of course, a beautiful woman who's devoted to the goddess, who is sexually assaulted and turned by Athena after she's been sexually assaulted, because she's assaulted in the temple of Athena in the myth, is turned into a Gorgon, right? And most of all that we kind of get from Medusa's story is the quote-unquote hero who cuts her head off on his hero's journey. And she's framed as the evil monster, okay, who can, of course, with one look, turn an individual to stone. And yet, when we work with a reclaimed understanding of, firstly, power, an honest appreciation of violence in history that gets turned into a hero story, we have a whole different view and understanding of Medusa. And that then changes how Algol also gets interpreted, okay? And so there's, and all of that, the patriarchal story, the silencing of her story, the reclaiming, it's all entwined in Algol. And Uranus has been conjunct Algol. Uranus is moving actually to the 27th degree. It moves a few days after this, it moves after this full moon. And so yet Algol's energy is there too. So there is also this complicated history of reclaiming. Histories of violence, histories of power, something waking those histories and stories up. And in Scorpio and Taurus, especially in evolutionary and embodied astrology as a practice of self-inquiry and co-creative presence, it's waking it up in our own story. And again, the illumination in this moment of the full moon is happening in Scorpio. And there's so much divine feminine energy there in Scorpio. There's Juno, who's relearning about her integrity with herself and others and the goddess. And then there's Vesta and Black Moon Lilith conjunct in Scorpio, which is, it's so deep that I don't got the words, and I'm a word person, except when the depth of my body takes over. The conjunction of Black Moon Lilith and Vesta is such deep, raw, primal healing. It is going in, especially for survivors of sexual violence. It is going into the depths. And with Vesta there, I mean, Vesta is the healing hearth within. In Scorpio, it fully is in our kind of root and second chakra. And also just our sense of safety, our sense of self. And with Black Moon Lilith there, it is this healing, scorpionic energy that is also going to be shedding and also going to involve looking and being with ourselves and the wounds that have come from others telling us we don't belong, from others projecting their views onto how we don't belong to ourselves. That's the crux of it. When we have got all those years of folks telling us why we're not good at this, or we don't belong this, or we've been surviving violence and all the various ways that violence occurs, it interrupts our experience with ourselves. And in my approach to working with complex trauma, which aligns in some ways with Gabor Mate, who I know a lot of folks know, trauma really is the root of our relationship with ourselves. We are never what we survive. We are the ongoing shift and evolution of our relationship with ourselves, our body, our ecosystems, and relationships with others and love. And it's dynamic and it's nonlinear and it's messy. And there is all of that here, both in our own story. Algol also brings the history of patriarchy in the West straight into it. That's always here, though, when we're working with astrology and myths that come from that history of patriarchy. And power over, it's just power over ideologies in our current world. And there's such breakthrough because there's Uranus, who is that lightning bolt embodiment, conjoining with the sun to restory our own myths so that we can enter new realities in 2026. But those realities are beginning now in May, because Saturn's entering Aries in May 25th. We can start writing those new myths now. So there is this incredibly raw, potent, dynamic energy that is about this kind of moving between our inner world and that's our emotional, deep, spiritual, psychological inner world. And Taurus brings us into our rooted embodiment. And if we can align and work with both of these, and there's a lot of energy in both, in Taurus and Scorpio, as we move through this full moon, we can come into an incredibly wakeful healing moment. Okay, and healing in this sense is not coming out of this idea that, again, like a linear approach to, I was broken, I am fixed. Let's just throw that away. It's this embodied, non-linear, liminal, incredibly juicy experience of being present. Because when we allow ourselves to be present with all these parts of ourselves, especially the parts that Black Moon Lilith and Juno and the Moon and Vesta are showing us it is safe to be with, because it's us. It's not the stories that were put on us. Whether those stories come from a family member, a teacher, a partner, the history of white supremacy, the history of classism, whether it comes, we're not those stories. This Scorpio energy brings us into our own deep embodiments. And the Taurus energy there, and especially Uranus, says now is a moment for such radical embodiments. And then next year, the sun's going to be conjunct Uranus in Gemini. Totally different energy. Okay, so there's a strong moment for these embodiments. Whew, and we've got more layers. We've got more layers, folks. So also things to mention. This full moon is also square Chariclo and Pallas, who have been hanging out together in Aquarius at 22 and 23 degrees. It's in an exact square with Chariclo, who is not just a healer. The myth is Chariclo is the wife of our wounded healer Chiron. Chariclo is not just a healer who is trained, but brings in grace, holds space for healing. While Pallas Athena in Aquarius is this incredible wisdom. A wisdom to be reclaimed, because part of the ongoing journey with Pallas is her internalization of power over ideologies, which we see come through in the myth of Medusa, because it is Pallas, as was very common of the goddesses in the ancient Greek and Roman myths that we have, where they would hurt the victims and blame victims, right? Because they were part of that power hierarchy, and that's how you maintain power in a power hierarchy, is owning this incredible wisdom that blasts through that. And in Aquarius, it's this visionary blast. And Chariclo holds space for that healing vision to come through. A healing vision that has the ability to support all that is going on in Scorpio under the surface. Those healing, alchemical, deep diving journeys into our integral self, especially what you know there, and that incredibly radical awakening, authentic embodiment in Taurus. And the square is the opportunity for that to become rooted into our authentic self, in our visionary gaze. That is also healing for ourselves and for the communities that we're part of, and that we're doing the work and moving with and journeying with. Now in the square, when we're not willing to look, when we're not willing to look, when we're resisting, when we're pressing down, when we're saying, no, I want power over, and I want my whole sense of self to be defined by power over others, and all the ways that happens, that's when the square and the opposition are going to come into a lot of tension, right? And in this dynamic energy, if we're still in this lens of self-inquiry, if we're resisting looking into parts of ourselves and also loving parts of ourselves, the scorpionic love does not get talked about enough in astrology. Scorpio, in a way that no other sign knows how to love, loves, because Scorpio is capable of the depths of unconditional love. Because Scorpio doesn't use words like good and bad. It just wants to know what's here. The Scorpio is kind of like, I don't care if what you want to tell me is good or bad. I just want to know it, because I know there's something you're not telling me. And if you tell me, I'll be that vulnerability of honesty and intimacy, that is what Scorpio craves. And this energy is pointing to, firstly, that honesty and intimacy with ourselves. Also with the goddess, and however she shows up in your own rituals and spiritual path. And then, of course, also with our intimate friends, partners, people that we're journeying intimately with in this life and other lives. And also people that have passed on and are through the veil, and all of that is here because that's all part of this energy. So it's very deep. There's a lot here. There's more layers. I'm like, how long do I go? There's a couple more things. So for folks that are still with me, I'm going to keep going a little bit. So it's also very important to mention that for this full moon, the modern evolutionary ruler of Scorpio is Pluto. And Pluto is, of course, retrograde in Aquarius right now. Pluto is very active in our previous new moon. So we're having the outer planets, they're speaking with each other and they're speaking with us. And that's why I keep saying and remembering that we're in process, because the outer planets are in process with each other and with us. And so Pluto, who's in Aquarius and is retrograde, is squaring Mercury, who has entered Taurus for this for this full moon at 3 degrees. Okay, so this square also could be really lovely at helping us see and glimpse and understand those raw parts of ourselves, those parts of ourselves that need to be seen and expressed, but expressed through an embodied acceptance. Mercury and Taurus, on the one hand, it can be kind of just straight and simple, say it as it is, no fancy truths. That also can speak beautiful truths in Taurus. And yet also sometimes Mercury and Taurus get stuck in the body. And it's only stuck if we're trying to convert what the body is speaking into a cognitive derived language, when really sometimes the body just wants to speak as the body speaks. And so this is all the more reason to listen to the body, because we have quite a bit of Taurus energy here. And also often those deep scorpionic parts of ourselves, they speak through emotion and they speak through the body. And they can't always be described in this language that I'm using now. They can't always be articulated like that. And so with the square to Pluto, who's retrograde, who's taking us into our own underworld so that we can reevaluate and re-understand and reconsider parts of our soul journey, just that. There's something here that's asking us to slow down. Okay, it's asking us to slow down and listen, because what we're listening to is connecting to all this energy of the Scorpio full moon. We also have, that's also heightened because Jupiter is in Gemini and Jupiter is square the nodes, and it is coming in, it's applying to its square, and it is potentially opening up understandings of especially that north node in Pisces, of how we are just not in control. Jupiter square these nodes can also be Virgo. Listen to the body, because when Virgo is an earth sign, and when Virgo gets too attached to its idea or its plan or how it thinks things should be, it spirals up into the mind and it gets disconnected from its embodied connection. And for Virgo, that's really hard because Virgo is an earth sign. And so the Jupiter square is kind of, as long as we're letting go of control, which Saturn is very strongly suggesting we should be doing, as is all of this deep Scorpio energy, then that Jupiter is cultivating insights and cultivating beliefs and potentially cultivating new beliefs with this North Node in Pisces, new beliefs that are going to just open us to new possibility and new understandings of our journeys. And so that is also here for this full moon, which brings me to the last point, which is Saturn. Okay, so Saturn is, for this full moon, it's at 28 degrees and 58 minutes. It is at the last breath before it hits the final degree of Pisces. And who is Saturn with? Saturn is with Ceres, who's at 28 degrees and 41 minutes. Okay, so they're conjunct. Their exact conjunction is going to happen at the 29th degree. And so on top of all of this, we have got Saturn conjunct Ceres, moving through that cosmic birth canal, the final threshold, that death into new life, entering the liminal space, showing us that a reality as we've known it is ending. And we are in a process that is lasting into 2026 of coming into new structures of understanding reality for ourselves, and of course how we interact with this thing called society, the various communities and societies and structures and social systems that we're part of. And as Saturn is in Ceres are coming to this final degree, there is a very thin veil, and we potentially have to get really quiet to hear them. We also potentially need to journey with them in dreamscapes and in nature and in meditation and in art practice and just in silence and practices of deep listening and synchronicities. And they have so much wisdom to share. And if you are moving through moments and seasons of grief right now, the unknown, fear of the unknown, getting quiet for this full moon could be really important, because there is so much that is shedding. It is shedding from our own life, from your life. It is shedding in the collective. It is shedding in human history. It is shedding the myths that fed power over ideologies as we come into communities and individuals and voices and spirits and souls, restoring, remembering, rewriting, and birthing new myths that have the lineages that have been forgotten. But it's a new time. So there's something new happening. And that's a lot. It is almost too much. And so if you need to rest, we rest. Trust me, it's a message for me too. I know it's easier said than done sometimes. And yet then the body takes over and we don't have a choice, right? Wise bodies that they are. So just watching the energy levels and all of that as we move through this, because it's potent full moon. And I am sending lots of love, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.